As I previously said, Mark Beards, I'm the CEO of Utility, which is only just over a year old. We were founded on the back of a deal with Leo Pharma, which I'll talk you through in a little bit of detail, but we have a very unique opportunity. We have the opportunity to bring a first-line antibiotic to the US market. This hasn't happened in decades, so we're very excited about that, for urinary tract infections in particular. And this is a big issue for the US, which I'll talk you through. So everyone's familiar with urinary tracts, but the FDA explicitly states two different types of urinary tract infections. There's an uncomplicated infection, which is typical acute cystitis, and there's a more complicated infection, which has where many of the innovations that have been happening over the last few years have been focused. We're going to talk about both of them because we can actually treat both types of infections. Uncomplicated, as I say, is usually in otherwise healthy women and is a big market. Over 30 million courses every year are prescribed in the US alone. But complicated infections is still very big. Over 6 million IV prescriptions and 7 million courses of oral antibiotics. But these are infections where there is an underlying functional or structural abnormality, something which is causing a need for strong targeted antibiotics that are typically IV switching to oral therapy and usually very, very expensive. So what's the issue? Well, the issue is that these infections that have been around since the dawn of time, the antibiotics that are treating them have also been around pretty much since the dawn of time, and there is a huge amount of resistance to them. In particular, E. coli, which is responsible for up to 90% of UTIs, has very specific resistance to the two main classes of antibiotics, the quinolones and the cephalosporins. This is reaching such significant levels of up to 40% across the US that the CDC has said this is a really serious issue and needs very strong attention. So what has the FDA done about this? Well, the FDA, as many of you are probably aware, are incentivizing antibiotics to come to the US to treat these more resistant pathogens. And they put in a very strong piece of legislation called the GAIN Act, which incentivizes through multiple means. And we can see here that, that they've specified three specific incentives: fast-track status, which obviously is very important when you want to get antibiotics into the market to treat these patients rapidly, and priority review status as well. So once you actually apply, obviously the FDA will really support you and get you through that process very, very quickly. But most specifically for us, it gives you additional market exclusivity. So if you're taking an established antibiotic, such as what I'm going to be talking about today, we can't rely on patents. We can't rely on intellectual property per se for the US market. What we can rely on is the extension of up to 5 years additional market exclusivity on top of the exclusivity from an NDA. So that could be up to 10 plus years of exclusivity for the US market. And this is a stronger protection than patents because it can't be challenged. And the clock starts on the day you get approved rather than any specific date in the past. So this is very, very strong as an incentive to bring established antibiotics to the US market as well as new innovative antibiotics. So what's happened in the past? Over the last few years, the industry has been really good at developing new therapies to treat resistant urinary tract infections. And we can see some of these here have actually been launched and are helping patients now. Some are in late-stage development. All of these antibiotics on this slide have received this qualified infectious disease product status to receive those different incentives. And this is a really good response from the industry. However, these are all last-line therapies. So it doesn't really address the issue of 40% resistance to first-line therapies. So we believe that the real unmet need is for a new first-line therapy that can treat these patients avoiding very, very expensive last-line therapies and therefore reserving them for those patients who really need them so that there's no rapid increase in resistance to those new therapies that are coming through. So what do we have? Well, we've, as utility, we've, as I say, licensed a product called Mesalinam, and that's the IV form, and the oral prodrug pivmesalinam for the US market. Interestingly, it is already first-line therapy in the US guidelines. How is it first-line therapy for US guidelines for urinary tract infections? Well, the guidelines that are structured to cover the US, the Infectious Disease Society of America guidelines, were developed in conjunction with the European Society, plus it covers Canada, where the therapy is actually available already. And there's a sort of sub-note to the first-line recommendation, which is not yet available in the US. So we're in a very unique situation where we have already a first-line therapy for the US market before we've even got it approved. But what do we actually offer to physicians and to payers and to patients in particular? This product has been used for 40 years. It was first launched across Europe in the 70s. We've had over 30 million patient exposures, and of those 30 million patient exposures, less than 300 specific pharmacovigilance episodes have been reported. It's a beta-lactam with very specific properties, which I'll go into, but this is a very, very safe antibiotic. And the reason why that's important is for payers and physicians to support the first-line use of an antibiotic, they need to trust that it will not cause significant harm to patients first. However, it's also proven really effective. And mesalinam and pivmesalinam are very targeted to gram-negative infections, specifically very, very capable of treating E. coli infections, specifically those E. coli infections that are resistant to cephalosporins and the fluoroquinolones. So it covers 90+% of those infections without any resistance issues. It's also been shown across multiple clinical trials, thousands of patients over the last 40 years, to be consistently effective in urinary tract infections for uncomplicated UTIs and for complicated UTIs. Then we also have, what is really unique about this product is the fact that you can use it and you can trust it's not going to create resistance in populations. I'm going to go into a bit more detail on this, but this is vital to a new first-line therapy. You don't want a first-line therapy to be entering the market and a few years later it's worthless because the resistance levels are so high. So what you need is something that's obviously safe and effective, but specifically for this very large population of urinary tract infection patients, you need something you can trust will have a longevity of life, that the payers can support it and can transfer these patients to be treated with a new first-line therapy that they can trust will continue to treat these patients over the long term. And finally, and very specifically, you find that the IV antibiotics that are used in hospitals don't tend to have an oral option to switch to. So these patients are switching to either a different class or a different molecule when they get transferred out of hospital. So that tends to delay their transfer out of hospital because they need to be observed to ensure there are no specific issues with that new class of therapy for that patient. We have an IV and an oral. That step down is very, very quick and very easy and can transfer patients into the community quickly, reducing the overall cost of therapy. So what do we have specifically around the claims of low resistance? I'm going to take Denmark, which is the home territory of Leo Pharma, obviously, as a case study. Denmark is 5 million people, very small population, and they have used pivmesalinam specifically for acute cystitis for many years. In fact, 1 in 8 prescriptions of any antibiotic for any reason is for pivmesalinam. It's got an 80% share, I wish I was the marketer behind this, but an 80% share in urinary tract infections in Denmark. Heavily, heavily used. This is a breeding ground for resistance. You have a very small population, heavy use of an antibiotic for a specific indication. What does that then translate to in terms of what has been observed in recent resistance analyses? 4%. If you look at the therapies that are used in a very small number of patients, such as Cipro, trimethoprim, etc., the resistance levels are much higher, and some of them are getting unusable now. But what we find with pivmecillinam is that it is resistant to resistance. It's stable to the typical beta-lactamase resistance that many bacteria produce because it's stable to hydrolysis. It's able to be much more effective in the urine, and it also has the ability to, I suppose, create an environment where a resistant bug can't survive, can't multiply, etc. What's called the fitness cost to develop resistance is far too high to then gain traction in the urinary tract. So this means that we have a therapy where payers, physicians, and patients can all benefit over the longer term from a new first-line therapy. What does that mean in terms of the overall market size, which is obviously something that we need to bear in mind? Well, when you look at the 30+ million courses of antibiotics for uncomplicated UTI and the 6+ million IV courses, over 50% of those courses are inappropriate. They're either using something the FDA has stated you should not use, black box warnings, quinolones, you should not use them for urinary tract infections, or the resistance levels are so high that you really should be looking for other therapies because those resistance levels are meaning that they're useless. So that means that we have a very specific market, which is a market taking over that first-line position from the quinolones, from the cephalosporins. And when we talk to physicians and payers about this, they're very, very responsive and very positive about the potential for replacing these old and unworthy and inappropriate antibiotics. So what have we done to move this forward over the last year? Well, as I say, we licensed the US rights to these antibiotics from Leo Pharma. And since then, we've secured the qualified infectious disease product status, providing that market exclusivity extension for both uncomplicated and complicated urinary tract infections. And we have now secured an IND late last year to start clinical trials. We are progressing into development, leading to potential launches in the next 2 to 3 years. It's a very, very short development program because we have such a huge amount of data already. And we're anticipating that we can run that clinical program with a minimum of capital. Just to finish off in terms of the team, we've pulled together a team. This is a virtual team. We've run very lean, but we have world-class experts across all of the functions that we needed to pull together to make this happen in such a short period of time. And we have a stellar scientific advisory board that's been supporting us through the whole process of FDA interaction and moving forward with the clinical program. And that is it. I think I'm bang on time. Any questions?